Re-
Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Let's talk about the upcoming full moon in Virgo. So, first of all, the first thing to consider, of course, is where did this cycle begin, which was in Pisces a couple of weeks ago. And that was at around about, I think, 12 degrees of Pisces. So, relative to your own chart, at least, it's always really great to look at just to track this cycle as it unfolds in your own chart. So, where is Pisces in your chart? And so 2 weeks later, the full moon arrives at Virgo, which is, of course, the opposite point, hence the full moon. And so the degree of this full moon is 27 degrees and around 40 minutes, something like that. I'll bring up the chart in a minute. But firstly, as I said, just track this in your own chart because whatever was inspired or born, a couple of weeks ago could have been just a small idea. It doesn't have to be anything grand. If it's something grand, then it's usually a number of different things in your chart that would support that process of things actually manifesting and unfolding in quite significant ways, let's say. Not that the moon is insignificant, but in terms of huge life turning events and changes, we can't just throw all that onto the cycle of the moon. The moon is actually a timer. It literally just acts as a clock on the wall. It just goes around the chart, as it were, in relationship to the sun, unfolds in its cycle through the 8 phases, and it just shows us the timing of different themes that come up through each cycle. The new moon always being the new cycle, new seeds, new intentions. The full moon showing us, well, what has actually come to some sense of culmination or fruition, or just what are we able to see from the point of view of what we intended a couple of weeks ago. So just a basic sort of background of what to think about when you are looking at the moon cycle. Okay, so what I want to read to start off with before I bring up the chart is the Sabian symbol for this full moon is literally mind-blowing. There's no other words to describe it, particularly from the point of view of one particular individual by the name of Putin. So, I mean, we can correspond this Sabian symbol in our own way relative to our own life story, and we can get some, it just depends on your perspective and your interpretation, of course, as is the case with virtually every symbol, really. And one thing with that is that we, especially when it comes to astrology, or even life for that matter, really, which that's astrology is life. But remembering the position of being objective, right? Because we are so subjective by nature. We look at things and we experience things and perceive and project and so forth quite subjectively. And it is the outer signs, particularly starting like when you're talking about Sag, Scorpio to some extent, of course, certainly Capricorn, Pisces, and Aquarius. Those later signs in the zodiac have far more ability to be objective, particularly when you're talking about Aquarius. It's a sign of objectivity. And we'll talk about that because the Venus-Mars conjunction, the synodic cycle that began not so long ago in the sign of Aquarius, speaks to a lot of things that are unfolding at the moment. And we can look at that from our own personal perspective, but through an objective lens. That's the key with Aquarius energy. So here's the Sabian symbol, which is the 28th degree of Virgo. Okay. And so once again, this is the book that I'm reading from, Dane Rudger and Astrological Mandela. If you just type that into, Google, you'll come up with, I'm not sure if there's a revised version relative to the picture looking a bit different. It's quite possible because I've had this book for over 20 years. So there's probably reprints. But just that name will get you this book. Now, this book is very valuable because sometimes when you are reading a Sabian symbol, even if it's for a Sabian symbol in your own chart or a Sabian symbol of the full moon or the new moon or anything else relative to the degrees of the zodiac, because that's what the Sabian symbol is. It's basically the 360 degrees of the zodiac, which encapsulates the 12 zodiac signs. There's 30 degrees in each relative to the tropical system that we use, well, that I'm using. Each degree has a very specific symbolic archetypal meaning, right? And sometimes, more often than not, actually, these Sabian symbols hit on something quite profound that otherwise would be missed, right? So it adds a lot of value to symbolism, archetypes, and interpretation. Sometimes it just explains an incredible story of a huge life event, or one's life journey for that matter. I can certainly tell you that the degree for my ascendant, for instance, is bang on 100% my life. Really, it encapsulates the person that I am, the soul that I am, the woman that I am, the mind that I have, and what I've done with my life so far, really. So very valuable. Okay. 28th degree. Okay, are you sitting down? So the heading is a bold-headed man who has seized power. The keynote, the sheer power of personality in times that call for decisions. Whether at the religious or the socio-political and cultural level, there comes a time when obsolescent patterns of order and cultural refinement have to be radically and relentlessly challenged. Catabolic personages emerge to seize power and dictate decisions that alter the structures of society or within an individual life. An intense urge for cathartic changes mobilizes the will, and traumatic decisions are made. At such times, the issue has to be met with, and, ruthless as the power may appear, it must be accepted. That's, as I said, that can be interpreted in a number of different ways relative to whether you are applying it to yourself and whether that indeed, speaks to you at all. It may or it may not. And I can't be the decider for that, only you can. But I'm looking at it from the point of view of what's going on in Russia, right? And Ukraine, of course. And I specifically see that Sabian symbol being quite prominent for Vladimir Putin. Whilst he's not completely bold, he does have that appearance of being mostly bold. So, we kind of have to make some allowances for little details like that. But, just listen, you may have to rewind this and, listen to that Sabian symbol, because it literally couldn't be more literal from the point of view of what's playing out there at the moment. So I just wanted to put that out there. Not really wanting to focus on it too much, because it is a very sensitive topic, and rightly so. There are different positions, of course, as always in the world of duality, and I'm not really interested in talking politics anyway, but I just thought, how uncanny is it that the Sabian symbol for this full moon has that description, which seems to align with a particular individual in the sort of front line at the moment, as it were, relative to focus. Not that he's in the front line, but he's the focus, as it were. And I just thought that that's a really powerful validation of the power of this book, actually, and just how it can, in uncanny ways, really sort of nail things, right? And also relative to his chart. So, and I'm not going to go into his chart today, but I just want to, I guess, from a visual perspective, help us kind of get a feel for this. So the full moon would be in his 11th house, provided this time of birth is correct. There is some, doubt about his date of birth. I heard, some people are saying he was born in 1950. There's no real, as far as I'm concerned, credentials to validate that statement. Some might argue with that, and that's fine. It's neither here nor there to me. But if I'm taking this chart, which to me feels right, actually, Pluto, on the south node, and that's goddess Lilith there as well. He's got a very Pluto south node signature. There's no denying that, in my opinion. Anyway, that aside, the full moon falls in the 11th house. The new moon started here. It was actually on the cusp, really, of the 4th and 5th, again, provided this time of birth is correct. That may or may not be correct. We don't know for certain. So we just kind of have to, I don't like to assume, but we kind of have to, right, for the purposes of this example at the moment, at least. And also, Pluto, Saturn, Neptune, Mercury, all in the 12th. That also makes sense to me. If I was to come back and do a delineation on this chart, which perhaps I will, at some point, I have a lot of things to say about those planets in the 12th house. And one thing is that, when you're talking about people in power, such as political power, it is not uncommon to see them having the Sun in the 12th or even Saturn in the 12th, for that matter. Very common theme, actually. And some people might say, well, isn't the 12th house, the hidden, the unconscious, where we might feel like we don't have a sense of our own personal power? It is all those things. And having those planets in the 12th and being in position of power doesn't negate those statements. It's just really about understanding that at a bigger picture level, when you've got the Sun and Saturn in the 12th, there's some very strong psychic plug in, if you like, connection to the collective unconscious. And so these people are tuned into the collective in some kind of way, and they end up playing out, a very specific role, which is actually tuned into the collective, meaning humanity. So our state of consciousness, our state of awareness, these people actually feed off of. That's one thing that people sometimes forget when it comes to looking at leaders in power and not being happy with them, because how can we be? They're most of them are quite tyrannical, and typically they're just all about power and the abuse of power. There are some political people that have more of a humanitarian or authentic approach, let's say, but far and few in between. And so one thing that we always need to recognize, which is a way of empowering ourselves and consistently evolving through a way of being conscious and aware of our own stuff, our own shadow stuff, right? I've sort of diverged a bit. I apologize for that. I'll come back to the full moon chart in a moment. But I just want to highlight that this is a great example of a leader who essentially has been chosen by their collective in some kind of way. That's probably a hard pill to swallow, but that requires a lot of objectivity to even tame that notion and that concept, and that just really speaks to the stages of evolution from the point of view of evolutionary astrology. We have this model where, and I'm simplifying it, it's a bit more complex than this, but we have this model where we identify that around 85% or so of the population on the planet live through the filter of what we call a consensus reality, hence compliance, etc. Then there is a smaller portion, around 15 to 20%, that live in the individuated state of reality. That's Uranus. The first state was actually Saturn. And then, of course, we have the higher level, which is Neptune. That's a very small minority group of people. Those people are usually people like Jesus, Buddha, other figures that have come through as avatars and spiritual teachers and so forth, for the purposes of helping people, humanity, to evolve and grow spiritually with no gain for themselves. They have no personality and ego, those sorts of people. Anyway, just a few points to consider when we are looking at these sorts of things. But just going back to this full moon in his chart, if it is in the 11th house, which would make sense to me, the 11th house, really speaks to, if this is his chart, it's speaking to his connection to humanity and groups of people. That's the 11th house, apart from many other things as well. And so I heard of late as well that he's put a stop to social media in Russia. And remember what that, Sabian symbol said. It basically spoke about, let's just go back to it just for a quick moment. Bald-headed man who has seized power. You've got to have a lot of power to shut down, the social networks and platforms in a country. I mean, can you do that? Can I do that? No. So, I mean, that's just, that's just like the tip of the iceberg, right? That's just one little thing. But it is an important thing from the point of view of relative to technology and the platforms of social media and how they, at least at a healthy, positive level, give people a voice to communicate, to share information, to have discourse, to have a voice. And so that's been taken away. As far as I understand, this is what I've heard through some sources floating around, that they are people that actually live in Russia. A couple of girls on my Instagram account, for instance, they're Russian, and they've spoken about this happening. So I'd say it's probably true then. That issue aside, of course, the keynote was the sheer power of personality in times that call for decision. I think personality is a pretty important key word in this Sabian symbol as well, because typically when we're talking about these sorts of figures in life that are very personality based, because if you are not personality based, you're not likely to get into this field and take on this position of power anyway. The positions of power like this really need a very specific personality, right? And so there seems to be perhaps a disconnect to what I would call the soul. Not a complete disconnect, because we can never be completely disconnected from our soul, but perhaps a better way to put it would be to say that these people are driven and motivated from the ego and the personality, right? So anyway, we'll move on from this guy, and we'll get now into the full moon. So this full moon chart is really bizarre, I have to admit. I've been looking at this for the last couple of days, and it's really, really bizarre. First of all, it's if you notice, and this is based for Melbourne, so it'll look the same, except everything will be on a different side of the chart relative to your location, but it'll look the same from the point of view of, everything over here on the right-hand side is contained through Capricorn right through to Taurus. And then, we have these asteroid goddesses up here, which are, extremely important, but we're not here to talk about them today. And then we have the moon on her own, on the other side of the chart. This is also known as what's called a singleton chart. It's a very, specific design of a chart pattern, you could say. Some people are born, with this particular design. And that says something very specific as well. But just relative to the full moon, it's a very unusual Virgo full moon, because it's Virgo, and so it's earth, it's feminine. It does take us into the realm of reality, let's say. It takes us into the field of the work that we are doing, the service that we may be giving, health. The one thing to always remember about Virgo, and this is really key for Virgo, is the way your body functions, right, in terms of all the different rhythms that the body goes through naturally, that the body organically just assesses and works out for you. It tells you when you're hungry, it tells you when you're tired. I mean, the moon is a big part of that, actually. The moon actually tells you when you're tired and hungry. But Virgo does correspond to these rhythms in our body, the circadian rhythms, sleep cycles and things like that. That's all very much tied into Virgo. So a good way to understand when the Virgo archetype is kind of working in a bit of a chaotic way, let's say, which would be the opposite Pisces, is when we are, just really disorganized, right? Really disorganized with our rhythms, our sleep, our sleep's not in sync, we are just, we have broken sleep patterns. We might experience some anxiety, we're just kind of really restless, and we're wanting to kind of do things, but we're sort of all over the place. That's a very Virgo type of experience, right? So full moon in Virgo, certainly does highlight to us where we need to get. What I like to use to describe this is the word Virgonized, which is not an actual word. It's my own made up word, but I love it because, it brings in Virgo and being organized. It brings it in together, and it just sort of fits very nicely. Virgonized. I've always used that word for years and years and years. And actually, one of my brothers is a Virgo, and I often say to him, have you Virgonized yourself, your room, your life, your whatever? I'm just kidding. I don't say that to him, but I'm just using it as a funny example. So it highlights to us matters of health. I think when we look at what's going on in the world at the moment, because we are still in this story that, started around over 2 years ago now, and there's different positions in that story, there's different perspectives and whatnot, and I'm not here to discuss any of that, but whichever way we look at things, or whichever position we have taken, I think the moon in Virgo is potentially wanting to highlight to us where we have how have we focused actually on the aspect of life that speaks to health, and that's obviously a really big deal at the moment, and has been for a long time. Not so much because of what is claimed to be present in the ether relative to the virus, because the fact of the matter is that I'd rather not go into that sort of stuff anyway, because it just kind of goes into a different direction. So, but anyway, you all kind of know what I'm getting at, right? So, how is your health? That's a good question. How is your health? And when we're talking about health, we're talking about every single component, mind, body, spirit, or soul. So how are we when we're checking in on ourselves with those layers? How are we in sync? Are we in tune? Are we listening to our own body speak to us, because it communicates to us all the time? We tend to ignore and push things aside, or sometimes in just complete denial or whatever, but the body will always send the messages through, no matter how much we try and numb it through various things, whether that's substances or whether it's other things altogether. The body always has a way of repairing itself and healing, and also speaking to us. And so this full moon in Virgo, I think, is highlighting where we're at on those sorts of levels, very simply put. But this is where it starts to get a little bit more complex now, because Virgo is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is in Pisces. Mercury is conjunct Jupiter in Pisces. Now that's the vertex, in case anybody's wondering what's VX. It's called the vertex. We don't need to consider that for today, okay? So just leave that out. The fact that the ruler of this full moon is in Pisces and is conjunct Jupiter in Pisces is a really interesting phenomena. I'll go into that in a minute. Furthermore, Neptune is also opposite this full moon. The moon is trine Pluto. That's a real saving grace, actually. Not an easy one, but it's very helpful to have Pluto trine the moon. And of course, the sun is sextile Pluto, right? And that's important too, because the sun is part of the full moon. The sun and moon are opposite each other. That's what a full moon is. So you kind of need to tie it all in together. I feel though that this Virgo full moon is not as simple as we might, not as simple as and as clean as a Virgo moon would like to be. Interesting, I use the word clean because that's all about Virgo. Cleanliness is corresponds to Virgo. The fact that the ruler is in Pisces, Mercury, and Mercury in Pisces is in its detriment in terms of essential dignities and abilities, which applies to planets being in perhaps a dignified position or a not so dignified position relative to the sign that they are in, right? That's, I mean, essential dignities and abilities is part of your core basic understanding and foundations and building blocks of astrology. You have to know that stuff, really. And then you take things further, expand and evolve your understanding around that, because a planet in detriment or fall, as we call it in terms of this system, has a very specific meaning, but you need to understand it in the context of the whole chart, right? Nevertheless, Mercury is in detriment, which means it's not at its strongest point. It has a weakness. It is interesting, though, that Jupiter is in Pisces and is conjunct the Mercury. So Jupiter rules Pisces as well as Sagittarius. So Jupiter in Pisces, offers magnificence in terms of the world of magic and spirit and transcendence and inspiration and imagination, creativity, all those sorts of things. But it also can be difficult from the point of view of blowing things out of proportion. So what can it blow out of proportion here? Well, it's conjunct Mercury, so it's got to do with information, logos meaning speech or word, coming from the Greek. So there can be an overload of information that, through the personality as it is perceived, can be very misleading and misguiding. Around what? Around our matters of health, because the full moon is in Virgo. So I think this full moon really speaks to, we have to be able to discriminate and discern, and again have critical thinking, critical reasoning skills around what we are listening to. Mercury rules the anatomy in the ear, right? So it really speaks to the information that we hear. But just to draw a distinction here, actually listening, like when you listen to someone, I'm not talking about when you hear somebody. You may be hearing me right now, but you may not be listening. There is a real difference between hearing and listening. And the ability to really listen, which is actually an art, is actually ruled by Venus. And Venus at the moment is in Aquarius, and she's actually forming a square to Uranus. And that's a whole other story, which I don't think I'm going to have time to get into today. So I might come back and just do a separate video. But this conjunction between, Venus and Mars, and forming a square to Uranus, which is basically, within range as of this full moon, is a really interesting and challenging journey around our own freedom, our own truth, the ability to step outside a boxed in reality and perspective, and finding a way to be really objective about everything that we are looking at, listening to, absorbing. But I'll come back and talk about that Venus square Uranus, because it's a really, really interesting dynamic. Going back to this full moon, I'll just clear all those lines. So as I said, the full moon is opposite Neptune. So that within itself can be quite challenging. Neptune is not an easy archetype. It's not an easy frequency. It's beautiful And a lot of people love the energy of Neptune. It doesn't appear to be threatening, but when you're talking about being objectively clear and seeing through the smoke and mirrors bullshit that's going on a lot of different levels, Neptune really struggles with that. Well, it's not Neptune that struggles with it. It's we struggle when we are looking at things through the Neptune filter. Once you take the personality through the Neptune filter, you view things through the personality. And Neptune is not of the personality. It's the complete opposite to that. It's not of this world. So when we have a strong Neptune presence, which we've had right from the beginning, this new moon started off in Pisces. It was right there with Jupiter. Neptune wasn't too far away. It was close enough to be there as a conjunction. So we have this new moon starts off in Pisces with Jupiter, Neptune flooding it, which, you know, with our spiritual life practices, dreams, inspirations, retreat, you know, escaping from reality, all that sort of stuff can be amazing. You can just be totally blissed out. I've been drifting a lot the last few days. Drifting is Neptune, by the way, when you drift, whether that's in thought or whatever that is. So just a Neptune embodiment. And when that's done in a healthy way, it's an awesome experience. It's like being on drugs without being on drugs, right? But Neptune obscures, if you like, our, you know, sort of clear reason, as it were. And this moon is in Virgo, this full moon is in Virgo, and we have to have some clear, rational, critical thinking around our body, our health. What are we doing around that? Not only those things, but also around matters of self-improvement, you know, just improving how we live our life. You know, our life changes on so many levels, right? At so many different stages in life. And age is a big contributing factor to that, which is ruled by Saturn. You know, when you are 15 years old, the energy that you have when you're 15 or even when you're 20 is not the same when you are, you know, 50, 60, 70 and 80, etc. You might still be really strong and fit and healthy, you know, at those later ages, but it's not going to be the same as when you were 15 and 20. You know, that's just the nature of the biological clock as it is dictated by Saturn, right? So depending on who you are, what's going on in your life, you know, what are the matters that are important around your own quality of improvement of life. And generally, you know, if we are healthy, right, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, to our best capability, then, you know, it is safe to say that our life functions reasonably well, if not really good at times, right? And so when we have these external challenges, which we do, all of us at different times, some more than others, and etc., when we are healthy, we are better equipped to deal with the challenges that actually come. One thing about Virgo as well is because it has that side to it of striving for perfection, and nothing can ever be perfect enough for Virgo. It doesn't matter how perfect it seems or how perfect somebody might think this is, that the Virgo will critique it and find something about that is not actually perfect. That's its nature, right? So there's inherently nothing wrong with it. There's inherently nothing wrong with any archetype for that matter. But I guess, you know, some of the shadow stuff that can creep up when Virgo is emphasized is our inability to be compassionate, which is the opposite sign, Pisces. We can just be a little bit more nitpicking, you know, it's the nitpicking and the criticizing without any compassion or, you know, sort of critical judgment that is useful, right? But if we're just being negative and judgmental, that's Virgo at its worst, the shadow at its worst, unable to connect with its polar opposite, Pisces, which is about being more compassionate to a situation or to an individual or to oneself for that matter. So these themes come up very strongly with this Virgo Pisces polarity being emphasized really all of this month, actually, because the new moon started 2 weeks ago, which was what, what are we now, 14th of March? That'll be the 8th, early March, right? So, well, I suppose we could even say, since Pisces season began, we've got this strong Pisces emphasis. We haven't had the Virgo come into the picture until now with this full moon. So this is quite critical. The other thing is that I think Pluto forming a trine does give us an opportunity to work with some material in a way where we can find a greater sense of self-empowerment by understanding the decisions and choices we are making around our health. Now, I wasn't going to bring this up, but I'll bring it up because it seems to be important. And this is not the first time this has happened, but it's just uncanny that in the last 2 weeks here in Australia, 3 athletes have had heart attacks and 2 have died. Okay, and this is subsequently having taken the liquid into the arm. And I forgot to mention in the beginning, relative to Alan Oaken, who recently passed away, which was a very, very, very sad thing to hear. And yeah, I mean, I just want to pay my respects and condolences to his loved ones and his family. But I'm also really kind of pissed off because, he wrote a personal post 5 days before he left this world. And he was voicing his frustration around how could he have contracted this thing when he's had the liquid 3 times. He was clearly frustrated. Now, I'm not, these are not my words. This has come directly from his social media platform. And I was kind of wondering whether I should bring it up or not, but I'm only bringing up something that was written publicly, so I don't feel I'm disrespecting anyone by bringing this up. It just, it must make us have some question marks. The 3 athletes that just in the last 2 weeks all had heart attacks here in Australia, athletes. Admittedly, when I say athletes, they're not, young as in 20 years old. They're a little bit older than that, but that's not the point. These are healthy people. 2 died. Heart attack. Now, heart attack is one of the biggest things that's been reported, myocarditis, as they call it, relative to one of the greatest symptoms or side effects that people seem to be experiencing post the liquid. I know it's a sensitive topic, and I know feels like a negative thing to focus on, but it is a fact, and I mean, we can deny the facts, we can pretend it doesn't exist, but it does. And I think it's important to actually address it and speak about it, not for promoting debate or conflict, but just for, promoting a healthy skepticism in everyone, right? A healthy skepticism to ask questions. This full moon is in Virgo, right? So, it brings all this up as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so what else have we got with this full moon? Oh, yeah, we've also got Vesta recently ingressing into Aquarius. And I made a couple of comments, and people were very interested in hearing about her, which is great. I love it when people are interested in the goddess asteroids. Vesta is one of the most mysterious, if you like, at least out of the 4 major ones that we generally tend to use, which is Ceres, Pallas Athena, Vesta, and Juno. They're the 4 most popular, well-known asteroids that are used in most astrologers' charts, I would say. But out of those 4, Vesta is the most complex. the most mysterious. And that has to do with the mythology where when Saturn swallowed his children, she was one of Saturn's daughters. She was the first one to go in and the last one to come back out. And so she spent the longest period inside, therefore hidden. And so who knows what she was doing, when she was in that inner world. It's very, very meaningful that that happened. That's not a coincidence. There's something very profound, and it does seem to correspond to just the mysterious nature that she has. I mean, there's very little written about Vesta. We know quite a bit, but there's very little. There's hardly any pictures of her. She's a real mysterious goddess. And I normally, when I think about her energy or feel into her energy, because she's actually very prominent in my own chart, she's exactly conjunct my Mars. So she's an archetype that I personally feel into and understand and work with, actually. And she does have so much to do with my spiritual life and my sacred practices, which I'm very, very passionate about and take the initiative towards because Mars is there. The interesting thing is that Pluto, Vesta, Venus, and Mars were all together in Capricorn, the last few weeks, right? Quite a few weeks, actually. And what's going to happen is Venus and Mars formed their conjunction about a week or so ago, right? In Aquarius, which is a synodic cycle. So a whole new cycle is beginning with those two in that archetype. We also have the new cycle that began with the Venus star point in Capricorn. And Vesta is not going to catch up to form a conjunction to Venus and Mars. So she's kind of doing this journey in a solo sort of way. She's not going to do it with Mars and Venus as she did when she was in Capricorn. But what I will do is I'll come back and talk about Vesta in Aquarius. Perhaps when I talk about the Venus square Uranus and so forth. So yes, I was talking about Pluto creating perhaps what we could experience as some sense of empowerment around taking control, Virgo, of our health, Virgo, through being more critical, inquisitive, and discerning the decisions that we are making based on what we are told. This is an ongoing thing, and it can't be not talked about and ignored because there is still so much unfolding around that, right? This story hasn't finished. That's pretty obvious, right? I know it's different in different countries as it appears on the surface, but I never am satisfied with what appears on the surface because I know that that's just the tip of the iceberg. But that's my nature. That's the way I am in a psychological and soul sort of level. I tend to explore, probe deeply, ask questions, investigate, and I'm not satisfied with the first thing that just shows up on that surface level. I need to understand more and know more about it. So I have that natural investigative mind, right? My concern, though, with this full moon, because the ruler is in Pisces conjunct Jupiter, as I said before, Mercury is in its detriment in Pisces, and yeah, it's great for all the imaginative, beautiful Piscean experiences, but when you're talking about the critical reasoning skills, objective mind, it's pretty challenging to establish that with a Mercury in Pisces, and especially conjunct Jupiter. It can just blow things out of proportion. So I think we need to be really careful with what sort of shows up at this time for us, because it could be that some kind of health situation does arise at this time. It might be that you go and see a doctor at this time. You might go and see a specialist at this time. There just might be something going on for you, and it doesn't have to relate to this narrative that has been, that's swamped this existence for the past over 2 years. It could just be something completely, totally unrelated to this external drama, right? And just something very personal that you are going through. Virgo gets us to examine and to look at things very critically and work out, what do we need to discard out of our life? What do we need to do more of? And how might we do that? How can we become more disciplined and organized to create some sort of ritual routine to get that happening? Where's the discipline going to come from? This is what Virgo can assist us with. And a full moon in Virgo may not necessarily assist us with it. It might for some, but it might just be that it really brings that home for you. It really just kind of highlights that and says, okay, well, this is what's going on here with your health on this level. This is what, your sleep routine that's so all over the place. This is the impact that it's actually having. So have a look at this and think about what you could work out in a practical way that could be of greater assistance, but also find that ability to commit to that, right? Because we're all a bit lazy at times, let's face it. No one's perfect. And we all get, dragged into, well, I don't know if dragged into is the right word, but we all get sort of used to things, right? We get used to doing this in that way. We kind of just stay with that. It's all our little comfort zones, we just get comfortable and become complacent. Well, Virgo is going to make things a little bit uncomfortable because it wants you to do the work. But my point with Pluto is that Pluto can help us feel a greater sense of empowerment with our journey around these sorts of things. The other thing that I think is worth noting as well is that this full moon forms a square to a midpoint here in Sagittarius. And this midpoint, which is at about 27 degrees, brings in Pluto as well, because, well, let me just show you what I mean. It might just... Actually, let's just clear that. All right, so if you're working with solar fire, if you go to reports and you get this screen, if you go to midpoint listing, make sure you've got 360 degrees on the dial there. So what are we looking at? We want to look at, well, are there any midpoints? Are there any significant midpoints to this full moon? So where was the full moon? It's virtually 28 Virgo, right? So if you look over here, can you see Pluto's south node at 26 degrees? That's only 2 degrees off the full moon. And if you go to Virgo, which will be... Where are you, Virgo? That's Libra, Virgo. No, sorry, not Virgo. What am what am I thinking there? Sorry, disregard. And anyway, that's still fine, because what I've showed you is that if you bring this up and you want to find midpoints, well, first of all, 28 Sagittarius, in this case we're looking at 26, is squaring to Virgo, right? Sagittarius squares Virgo, right? Mutable. So we can see, as I said, that there is a Pluto south node midpoint there. So what essentially is going on here is this, that the axis of the north node and south node and Pluto form this midpoint structure that connect to the moon. Now, what does that mean? Well, it brings in the nodal axis, so it is bringing in something relative to, of course, darker content relative to the South Node in Scorpio, with the focus of the North Node in Taurus becoming more grounded. And Taurus also connects to the physical body, not so much health, but it does connect to the physical body. Stamina, things like that can be described by Taurus as well. But Pluto being at squaring the midpoint, right, is to this moon with these nodes, it just draws in the nodes to this full moon, and it further draws in Pluto. Pluto's already trined this moon, but in this case it draws in Pluto and the nodes from a square position. So there is some kind of tension there as well, implied by the square aspect. And it is having to let something go that belongs to the past, and by working towards the North Node in Taurus, which is becoming more grounded in our own body, listening to our own body. By doing that in some kind of way through this full moon energy as well, Pluto can help us, but Pluto will be the key here because it is squaring the nodes. So it's kind of like it's a little bit like being at a crossroad, and it's like, well, do I stay with this idea, decision, path, or do I take the high road, as it were, the unknown road, the road that looks a little bit more risky because I don't know what's ahead necessarily, but I know that I kind of need to move and break away from da 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 da. That's kind of how I would read this into this full moon. And of course, these nodes, as they keep because they move backwards in the zodiac, they're eventually, the North Node is going to get to Uranus, and that's going to be super, super interesting. I think that can be an amazing help, actually. But again, I'll come back and talk about that later. Finally, there was just one more thing that I wanted to add. Yeah, I wanted to add that just in terms of bigger picture and perhaps more consensus reality of our experience at the moment, I noticed that all the planets have nodes, right? So normally we focus on the moon's nodes, which are the two that I was just pointing to. They are the moon's transiting nodes. Now, every single planet in the chart has nodes as well, right? When you were born, the planet's nodes were in a particular position for all of us, right? And when you're talking about the outer planets particularly, the nodes are in the sort of same degree and sign for a super long time. I'm talking like a super, super long time. So what is happening at the moment, and when I say at the moment, it's been activated this year, 2022, which is remarkable, not easy, but remarkable in terms of archetypal signatures and symbols. The nodes to Saturn, okay, are actually at 28 degrees of Capricorn, while the South Node is. The North Node's 28 Cancer. So Saturn's South Node is being hit off by Pluto this year. Now, this is a really powerful frequency that's being hit off by Pluto, because it really just brings in the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that started, a couple of years ago. It just brings all that back up again. We're not through with that Saturn-Pluto energy, not when transiting Pluto is hitting off Saturn's South Node, which is at 28 degrees of Capricorn. And so this too is speaking to the further dismantling and or destruction that's appearing on the external level in the various ways that it is. So I don't think 2022 is necessarily, the year where everything's just, and I never thought it was going to be anyway, but this just further emphasizes that this year is still, there's a lot of hard work ahead of us, and Pluto Saturn is hard work. It's the hardest work that we would ever do, Pluto Saturn energy. I spoke about this about 3 years ago when I did a video on Pluto Saturn conjunction. I think I said words to the effect that, what's going to be born out of this, what's going to come out of this is going to be the most difficult work we will ever have to do. But at a soul level, in terms of our evolution, provided we can integrate this energy, it's like it takes us, leaps and bounds ahead in terms of our personal self-empowerment and evolution. But at a collective external level, Pluto Saturn is the deconstruction and crumbling of the old system. Saturn, I mean, we've been hearing this a lot, I know, the last couple of years, because it's just what's being, well, in fact, it started in 2008 when Pluto first entered Capricorn, right? So, these cycles, they take, Pluto in Capricorn it's a long cycle, it takes a long time for things to completely be dismantled, because we're talking about imprints, psychological imprints of ideologies or patriarchal systems or ideologies that, have been in play for thousands of years. Do you think that someone's just going to come in and just, click of a button, wipe that out? I don't think so. So it does take time for evolution, period, but also for things to change. Things don't change so easily. Look at yourself, right? Look at your own life. Is it easy to just change something that is imprinted inside you, or something that's become a habit over a long period of time? Is that an easy thing to do, to just wake up and go, oh, I'm just not going to do that anymore? It's not easy. It requires a lot needs to kind of come together for that shift, that breakdown to occur. When there's a breakdown, there needs to be a rebuilding, which is why I'm saying that, Saturn's node being hit off by Pluto, which is further crumbling, destruction, we've got a lot of work ahead because there's a lot of rebuilding to do. But, Pluto in Aquarius is going to bring in a level of that when Pluto gets to Aquarius. It's going to bring in a lot of other interesting things too. A lot of it's not going to be so nice because Pluto is not about being nice. Venus is. But Pluto is about getting to the core, the essence, the depth, the things that we don't want to see is where Pluto takes us. Pluto corresponds to the unconscious. I wrote a post about it just a couple of days ago relative to the Persephone and Pluto myth, which is one of my favorite myths. It's such a powerful metaphor for life in so many different ways. And Pluto and Persephone, very simply put, I feel that myth is so apt for what's happening in life right now and what's been happening in life over the last couple of years, from the point of view of, if Pluto is the unconscious, which it is, the symbolism to Pluto and Persephone is Pluto abducts Persephone and takes her into the underworld. That could be said to describe our own personal life experiences when we get taken, as it were, into the unconscious, which is the things that we are blindsided by, not aware of, not consciously aware of, don't consciously want to go there necessarily. And it is the components, it's our shadow. So it's the parts of ourselves that we don't easily find comfortable to really look at. And so life will take us there at different times in life through different experiences. That will be, that manifests in so many different ways. Pluto is the end, transformation, deaths, endings, etc., only to bring through a rebirth, as it were. So the experience of death is Pluto. When we lose somebody, that's a Pluto experience, and that pain is unbearable for many, many people because of our attachment to love, a person, etc. Right? So Pluto takes us, and has been taking us the last 2 years, through these states of having to come back to our own personal power, especially since personal power has been so compromised, for more than 2 years now. At larger scales and bigger picture levels, it's been compromised for thousands of years, but just in a very cataclysmic, intensified way, it's been hit off severely the last 2 years, right? So it's forced us back onto our own personal power and resources, and learning about what is our own personal power, what resources do we have internally that can help us survive and thrive as well, and push through. Because the world has just been smashed with psychological fear for over 2 years now in an intensified way. And we've survived. A lot of us have, probably most of us have. So, if you've survived, then you're doing pretty well. Even if you've, been going up and down like this, and regardless of the choice you've made, if you are still here, you've survived. And that's something that we kind of need to give a little bit of praise to ourselves as well. I have to remember that too, because, the last 2.5 years have been extremely challenging for me as well. Um, Personally and frankly speaking, and most of you are aware of this, I have taken the path of what I choose is right for me, which is my freedom, my sovereignty, my choice. I do what I want with my health and my body. That's just where I stand with it. And I'm essentially ostracized in society because of that. And I'm not the only one. There are millions that are. But I'm just speaking about the fact that, 2.5 years in, and I'm still excluded, from society, right? From going to the gym, going to the hairdressers, whatever, right? Blah, blah, blah. And whilst they seem to be superficial things, they are, although the gym's not superficial for me, because the gym is about my health, right? And the gym is like, for me, it was like getting up and having a shower. When you have a shower, you feel invigorated, you feel alive, you feel, your energy just shifts and cleans. And that's how I felt when I went to the gym. I felt invigorated. So anyway, I've had to, find other means and other ways and just do whatever I can, right? But I'm mentioning this because that's what we've had to survive. We've been so tested and challenged psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually and physically, that we've had to break down, into these deeper layers of whatever we've covered up, or whatever we have denied, or whatever we're not aware of about our own self, because of the isolations, because of the disconnections, because of the segregation, because of, so many different layers. But where is the value in all of this? The value is in coming to a clearer position of your own personal power as a sovereign, infinite soul that derives from source, which is infinite. And just remembering that you know, our evolution means growth, development. It means going through difficult times. It means being tested and challenged. And it's not even that we're tested and challenged by the external, it appears that way because that's kind of the catalyst or the trigger. But essentially, the test and challenge is coming from deep within us about our own abilities, our own fears, our own insecurities, our own truths, our own honesty, our own vulnerabilities. Pluto takes us into the most vulnerable space within. It's not an easy energy. But just to finish up here, Pluto is trine this full moon. So, you know, I think that's very helpful, just from a sense of personal empowerment around my own health. How can I feel empowered about my own health with the decisions that I wish to make? And again, like I said, that can be totally unrelated to this external drama and just totally related to just how you feel. How are you feeling on a day-to-day basis? You know, are you getting enough sleep? What are you eating? You know, I mean, I had to change some things in my diet not so long ago because of something that I discovered. You know, I don't want to go into details. But let me just say this. I stopped eating chocolate about 4 months ago, and I used to eat chocolate every single night. Every night. I'd eat about, like if I had a block that big, I'd probably eat, you know, a third of it every night. And I love it. And it's all the sugar stuff. It, you know, milk, dairy milk, chocolate. You know, the worst thing for you. So anyway, my point is that I gave that up, and that's a real achievement. Like it literally is, because I was so addicted to it. You know, I was eating it every night for years, since I was a little kid, actually. Never stopped eating chocolate. And now I don't, you know, I don't even have any cravings for it. You know, I don't even, sometimes I might think about it, but it's just a thought and I just kind of bypass it and I go and do something else and then I just forget about it and bam, it's just gone. So that's a significant health change for me. Might not sound like a big deal to some of you, but it is a big deal because it contributes in a powerful way to my health. There's lots of other things I could do to bettering my health as well, you know, with other things, other substances that are not that great for me. But I've done that with chocolate, and that was I must admit there was a real sense of a real desire and determination to cut some things out regarding my diet with food. And it wasn't just chocolate, it was some cheese, a very specific cheese that I was eating that I didn't realize was just so bad for me as well. I still eat cheese because I'm not a vegan. I am a vegetarian, and I do still eat cheese, but I'm very selective in the types of cheese I eat. I stay away from yellow cheese, try to stick to just white cheese and just things like that. So yeah, you know, that was, and whilst that's not happening, didn't happen for me during the full moon, it did happen about 4 months ago, but we can make these changes that do contribute to health, which, like I was saying before, if you feel healthy, you will manage life a lot better. You will handle situations a lot better. You will handle crises and, you know, challenges that come from all sorts of directions, because your body is in some sense of equilibrium. Your body, your mind, your soul, when you have that sense of equilibrium, which is a sense of balance within, and you're doing okay with those levels, then you're better equipped to handle the challenges of life. Just think about it. You know, when you're sick in bed with a flu or a cold, everyone kind of responds differently to that as well. But let's just say that it was a pretty serious flu, one where, you know, you've got the aching bones and the aching muscles, and, you know, your head's about to explode and you can't move and you don't want any light because you've got the migraine. Like, that's a very serious kind of flu, serious in terms of how you feel. You're not going to it's not life threatening as such. But when you feel like that, do you feel, that you can combat the daily challenges of life? Absolutely not. You just need to go to bed, rest, and shut out everything, right? And sometimes we do need to have a cold and a flu. That's also not necessarily a bad, that's a healthy thing. Your body actually having some fever and fighting off some shit is showing you that your body actually is capable of work. It's still operative, still working in the ways that it needs to be. That's another thing. But the point is that when you have a sense of focus on feeling and being healthy, you are just better equipped at dealing with life. Okay, so I think I've said enough on that point. I guess that Moon in Virgo has really got me going on health, hey? All right, well, hope you enjoyed this one. I hope it gives you some food for thought, and just be careful with the Pisces end of things, right? If you can use that energy with spiritual embodiment and practices, that's your way through that energy in a really healthy way, or inspiration, creativity, art, things like that. But because Mercury is there, and Mercury is the messenger, it's all the data and information, it's what connects the dots to things. Just be careful with what you are bringing in your field, and not discriminating, discerning, and filtering correctly, right? Because you can be misinformed, misguided, in ways that are not going to be beneficial. So just watch that. Okay, see you guys soon with the Venus, Mars, Aquarius, square Uranus, Vesta in Aquarius video. I will come back and do that soon. Sending you all much love, and hope you are all safe and well wherever you are. Big love. Bye.